Councillor Thatchell, Councillor Keogh, can you hear us on live streaming?
Yeah, we're on board.
Councillor Keogh?
Mute myself. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so just be aware, councillors, this meeting is being live streamed and the meeting is open. We have no apologies.
Just a question.
Certainly, Councillor Sullivan.
Just with the record, what's mechanism is in place that would or preclude, say, a member who is viewing this recording the meeting, or is there any in place?
So, is there any? If I understand the question correctly, is there anything to stop people from recording this meeting?
No, I guess there wouldn't be online.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Because generally, sorry, through Mr. Moore,
Certainly.
if there was if this meeting and everyone was in attendance, you would read out and advise people in the gallery that this meeting is recorded, and just to be aware of that. But now this has been streamed, so there is potential for people to record that and utilise it. So is that something that we need to be aware of?
We should warn people, absolutely.
But a copy will be on our website at all times.
Yep. So for all, yeah. So this meeting is being live streamed and therefore people may retain copies of this, so just be aware. But council does keep copies online ourselves.
Wasn't council so much on the
Understood, Councillor Sullivan.
the potential for abuse.
We'll ensure that each speaker as they come in is informed.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting?
I'll move it.
Move Councillor Keogh, second Councillor Bingham. Those in favour? Carried. Matters arising from previous minutes. Having any disclosure of conflicts of interest?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to acknowledge and disclose a conflict of interest in item 7.1 on the agenda tonight.
7.1 duly noted.
Thank you.
Councillor Sullivan. And with that, Councillor Sullivan, we're going to move into item 7.1.
And as a good segue, Mr. Mayor, I'll just acknowledge that I have a conflict of this and leave the meeting.
No worries, Councillor Sullivan.
Right that way.
Got space for you at the back there. Councillors, we have a number of speakers to that. We'll start with Mr. Mark Ainsworth, if we could bring him in, please. G'day, Mark. So just to let you know that the meeting is being live streamed,
right,
and that people may record the meeting.
Sure.
Okay, so floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for an opportunity to talk to you all. I've got 5 points to make tonight. My first is that 75% of the neighbours who bought the property object, and all 3 of them are here tonight. So I think that's pretty significant. We care about our patch. Secondly, I think we need to respect our farmlands. I graze sheep and they help feed Australians, and we cannot continue to divide up our farms and our smaller plots of land. My third point is about conservation and my kids' future. My family's planted 4,000 trees on our property in just 6 years. My neighbour has 20,000, and across Moonyon Creek is the island where conservation volunteers have planted tens of thousands. Between us, we're helping deliver biodiversity goals at all levels of government, yours, state and federal. Don't undo our good work, please, by breaking up the property in between us all. My fourth point is perhaps my most important, and it's about zoning. Splitting up the property doesn't align with the zoning rules. I don't understand why you haven't accepted your own planning department's recommendation to reject. I sincerely hope nobody is being unreasonably influenced by others in this matter, and I say that with the greatest of respect, but I work in the spheres where...
Mr. Ainsworth, can I just point out that there is a recommendation before us and we haven't put anything else forward, so I'm not sure where that's coming from. So I'd prefer you just keep sticking to the...
I'm nearly done.
Yeah, no problems.
My fifth and last point is simple. Cutting out a 2 acre block or thereabout, a house block, from more than 40 acres, I think is highly unusual. I fear that if it's approved, others will follow, and I'll further challenge your zoning laws, which I think are pretty clear already. Thanks for your time.
Any questions, councillors? No questions?
Look, I'll ask one, Mr. Mayor.
Certainly, councillor. Question.
So councillor has put circulated a proposed motion, an alternative motion, and I just want to read out one bit of that. Have you read the alternative motion?
No, I haven't.
No, so you talk about some of your issues that obviously no one wants to see farmland developed. You talk about that. There's a section 173 agreement proposed on this alternative recommendation, which puts on extra conditions. So no further development and no new dwellings to be constructed. Would that alleviate some of your objections, or?
Yeah, some of it. What's a dwelling defined as?
Like a house, residential dwelling, commercial?
It sounds promising. I suppose my fear would be if we ended up with, because I'm aware that there are companies that build small portable things to get around definitions of dwellings. That would be a concern, to make sure that that wasn't left open for a de facto residence.
Okay, so subsequent to that one then, Mr. Mayor, this is of Mr. Bazutenhurt. Is there this alternative motion that's been proposed? Is there further conditions to alleviate what the speakers just said in regards to a developer potentially trying to get around a dwelling, for say?
Could I make a point of order, Mr. Mayor?
Certainly, councillor. What's your point of order?
That the alternative motion hasn't been put yet, and yet we're discussing it.
Yeah, no, that's correct.
It may not be put.
Correct, councillor. I suppose the question though is in relation to are there conditions that could be put on if it was to be approved. So I'll allow the question, councillor Tatchell.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I understand the question correctly, a dwelling is defined, and any dwelling needs building approval. So any future dwelling will have to be assessed against requirements of clause 54 as well as the building regulations. So you can't just put up any bona fide building and classify that as a dwelling. Is that a question you've answered?
So specifically, say a portable building, for instance, would this condition restrict that?
Mr. Mayor, can I pass that on to Rob Phillips, who's also looking after the building section?
Certainly. Mr. Phillips.
Through the chair, as was said before, a dwelling is defined under both the Planning Environment Act and the Building Act. So under that circumstance, this is clearly talking about a dwelling. If it wasn't deemed a dwelling and it was being used for accommodation, we would have to look into whether that was a permitted use or not, which is unlikely to be the case. And then there might have to be enforcement action undertaken.
I think too, if I was considering buying that parcel of land outside the house, I might want, and I was grazing animals, and I'd do that at our place, I would be wondering about sheds, if I've got machinery to spray weeds, so is that, I doubt that's a dwelling, but it's another structure that expands the scope of the property, because the current residence houses those facilities, and new owner would probably want to have similar on the new parcel.
That answers your question, I think.
Yeah, and my understanding is if a shed were, that would obviously trigger a permit as well.
There is requirements. If you use farmland for purposes, you want to put up a shed, they need to demonstrate that shed is directly related to the farming activities. So there is planning approval required if a shed exceeds a certain size, and they need to demonstrate its use for farming purposes.
Okay.
So can I just clarify? So that would mean that a shed would be classified as a building?
It will be classified as a building, but not as a dwelling.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the nature of our objection, the intent is to not have the infrastructure associated with a second owner on the new parcel of land. That's our concern, whether it's a dwelling or other sheds, or they're potentially large structures, new structures, That's where I'm coming from.
Understood.
Whether it's a dwelling or something else, I hope you get the intent of my question.
Any other questions, councillors? Thank you, sir. We'll bring to the next.
Thanks very much for the opportunity.
So we've got Mr. John Holding. Is Mr. Holding here? We'll get Mr. Holding in. Okay, Mr. Holding, just to inform you that the meeting is being live streamed and that it is being recorded, and that will be available in the public on the council webpage.
Put my best face forward then. Or,
All right.
thanks for the opportunity. I'm possibly going to cover some same ground.
Okay.
So I'll try my best to not cover what I did here. I assume you've all read my objection letter submitted some months ago, but I will cover a little bit of that if I can.
Certainly.
Our property at 109 Palmer's Lane borders Dunbar Road and shares about 400 metres of fence with the property that's in question. And my wife and I are of the view that the proposed subdivision will have an adverse impact at a materially detrimental level on our enjoyment of our property. We believe it will lead to an increased demand on the already depleted land and therefore further degradation and negative environmental aspects, be it due to additional stock loads being deployed, additional usage of water for both human and animal consumption, and or the additional buildings and homes that may come with it. We believe that there's been broad-scale destruction of the land in that area, and that the absence of trees and native wildlife on neighbouring properties compared to ours is a blight on those responsible for governing and planning the usage of that land over the last decades. And I believe it's time for the responsible authority, you people, to take a leadership role in ensuring the exploitation of this land ceases and set an example for our land should we manage in a sustainable manner rather than allowing small landholder allotments. The Pentland Hills should be just about called the Bald Hills, with the exception of our land where and our previous owner had planted 20,000 trees on our property, and Mark next door has put about 4,000 in his. The property in question here, I think, has 5, maybe 10, and they're not native. And when you look at the contrast between that property and ours, you can see what's possible with the native flora and fauna that we've been able to bring back. The microbats, the lizards, the frogs in general. And I'm curious to know, so my question is, what environmental studies or impacts have been done to warrant the submission of this application going through? I understand that Melbourne Water must be, so that's the first question. Melbourne Water must be consulted and notified of any subdivision application where they're an interested party, and there's 2 waterways that border this property. We've recently been successful in getting a Healthy Rivers grant to plant more trees for rabbit and weed control as well. I don't know whether that happened, whether Melbourne Water were notified. When I spoke to them earlier in the year, they hadn't been, and I forwarded on the information to them myself. I don't know whether the council had notified them. I'm curious to know whether they had, and if indeed they were consulted, what their position is on the application. I'm also curious to know that the councillor who's been advising the interested parties has a correspondence with any other voting councillors, and to what degree.
Yes, sir, I'd ask you to keep the planning matters. When you're making some connections there that need not be made. Councillors have an obligation, if they've been involved in any, to declare a conflict of interest, and I'd ask you to keep your debate purely on planning issues, please. Because that's what we're here to hear. We're here to planning matter, and you need to ask them on planning matters. So I don't like where you're going with that debate.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that, but fine. I understand that the councillor I've just read the Mirrabul News, so that's why I'm quoting there that a councillor this was back on March the 3rd in the Mirrabul News, the councillor who was advising one of the parties, I think if I take the quote correctly from the newspaper.
Don't know anything about it.
It was in the Mirrabul News, so that's all I know. So, on March the 3rd, that's where we heard that it had been deferred.
Deferred, right.
It had been deferred, and it also said that a councillor who was advising one of the parties has chosen not to be a part of the voting process.
So that's not relevant to the planning matter, and that's where I was going. So,
Okay.
so the fact that someone just has declared a conflict of interest, that's normal process. So
Okay.
if the council's been involved, they aren't involved in the decision-making process. This is the decision-making process.
Right, good. That's actually the answer. That answers my question. Yeah, good, thank you. I also, my property, we've owned this for about 3 years. There's a caveat on the title that says no more than one dwelling is able to be built on it. I assume that that same caveat exists on the titles of all the other properties that were subdivided at the time. I don't know the history of the area that well, so I'm curious to know whether that caveat exists on the property in question as well. It partially answered that because I heard part of the conversation you had with Mark earlier in the meeting, so maybe some clarity on that would be helpful.
Councillors, any questions? Councillor Bingham, you have a question?
I've got a question of Mr. Bazuna. Is the water authorities, do they need to be notified for this application, noting that, this application is not for, proposed dwellings, but it is obviously an application to slice up some land. Are the water authorities still required to be notified?
Yes, Mr. Chair, through the Mayor. There's two types of referrals, 52 and 55 referrals. 55 referral is a compulsory referral. So this was referred to Melbourne Water. They consented with conditions. It was also internally referred to infrastructure as well as environmental health. And both those internal departments consented with conditions. So that go to Melbourne Water.
Are there any other questions, councillors? No further questions. Councillor Tatchell, Councillor Keogh, no questions?
No questions.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Our next speaker is Mr. Howard Smith, who's the applicant. Is Mr. Smith here? Just before you start, Mr. Smith, I'll just inform you that this meeting is being live streamed, and it's also being recorded and will be public knowledge for tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, first of all, thank you for allowing me to speak at the meeting. I have spoken to some of the councillors by phone, but I appreciate being able to talk to you face to face. I've lived at the property concern since the mid-1970s when it was originally subdivided, and I'm not in a hurry to move, but my wife and I are both now in our 70s and not really in the best of general health. We were both in a bad motor car accident some years ago, and I've had several joint replacements and things like that as a result of that. But more importantly, currently I'm fighting prostate cancer. That's been going on for about 5 years. I've had surgery, which wasn't totally successful. I've since had radiation treatment, and that also has failed to dim the problem. And I don't know what comes next. I've still got to have blood tests on a regular basis. The PSA hasn't gone back to 0, which is supposed to. So that's as I can. Now, the problem that created the situation that necessitated me looking at realising some of the value from the property that I own is based on the fact that a member of my family used to use the property as security for a mortgage. I've never had to have a mortgage on the place myself. And the business he had that money invested in did go belly up. Net result was that I was left with the mortgage because, of course, it was in my name, it was my property, and I've been having to pay the interest due on that loan. And that has basically eaten into what superannuation I still have remaining. And the only way I could keep a roof over my head was to, as I say, realise some part of the value of the property. Now, I did originally plan on selling it and leasing it back, but that would not give me security of tenure, which is something I desperately want to hang on to for the sake of my wife. The subdivision plan basically means that the full value of the property, house and land, is severely depleted, right? The land by itself, with not the probability of building another house on it or anything like that, cuts the value of the land. And of course, jointly, they're worth far more than separately. But I'm prepared to accept that loss to retain the security of tenure on the house where I live. And whoever buys the land can use it for whatever they like, within reason. But they would, of course, have an investment in that land, and if they were to buy the house, put it back together again by just boundary realignment, realise a sizable profit for their investment. And I'm quite happy to let someone do that, just so I've got somewhere to live for the rest of my life, right? I'm not interested in retaining the full value of the property, don't need it, right? But the current rules that exist on the subdivision, which are no one can build a house on the property, doesn't worry me. I'm quite happy to, just someone use the land for what. So I've used the land myself, but my health means I can't do that myself anymore. As far as a further subdivision goes, well, no, I've got no interest in that being done or someone else buying it. I know that I'm aware now that some of my neighbours objected to the whole process, but I don't think they were aware. I think they thought this was a springboard to just further subdivision. I don't envisage that. I'm not interested in that. I just want to get some value back out of the property that I own, just so I can extinguish this debt I have and get some security of tenure with the house. Now, maybe some of my neighbours might be interested in buying the land too, because they can make a profit selling when I go, they've got the house then. But obviously someone buying the land would be prepared to buy the house without any qualms, put it back together, and then they've got a sellable property. I do not want to see in my lifetime any of those properties in that area broken up, because, well, I've been living there for over 40 years and it's a great place to live, plenty of open space. And the house I actually live in was one of the original farmhouses in the area. The name of the road, Dunbar Road, is named after William Dunbar, who had the first 1,000-acre grant of land, and it was his home. Now, the place was eventually subdivided up. Eventually Everett Palmer was the last landholder to run the area, I think about 200 acres, and it was Everett who subdivided it when you could subdivide below 100 acres, and that was back in the mid-70s. But anyway, all I'm interested in doing is resolving this mortgage problem I've got. I don't want to see any further subdivision of the area. I need to realise some value from that land so I can extinguish this debt and, more importantly, have a tenure, security of tenure for the rest of my life, however long that might be with this cancer problem. All right.
Questions, councillors?
Any questions?
Councillor Bingham?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, for all the questions, but I'd like to think we live in a perfect world and get a bit of a middle ground. So a couple of objections were based around, because, on this 173, this alternate recommendation that's been circulated by a councillor, some of the conditions are, no new dwellings, which obviously you've just said that, you don't object to that. But some of the concerns are around, that condition doesn't really alleviate the possibility of someone building a shed. So if there was an extra condition that nobody could erect a shed or a barn, or that wouldn't be objected to by you?
They can't build a dwelling. Like my next door neighbour has built a building which is not a dwelling, but it looks like a dwelling, but he uses that as where his wife does her art.
Yeah, so that obviously that's separate, but on this application, if there was an extra condition, so no shed or no barn, would you object to that?
Well, if someone wanted to use the land for horses or something like that, I would have no objection if they wanted to build that sort of thing. If the council wanted to put that provision on it, that would probably make it difficult for someone to buy the land, because then they couldn't house the horses or whatever they put on the land away from the weather. Now, that could be collaborative too.
Any other questions, councillors? Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
We have one more speaker tonight, Mr. Ian Buchanan. Yeah, Mr. Buchanan, I just want to let you know that this is being live streamed and it's being taped and will be on the council webpage for people to view tomorrow.
I wasn't aware I was going to be speaking tonight. I was going to sit in here and watch proceedings, but that didn't happen. I've just overheard what Howard said there. I live directly next to Howard, and that's our main objective. Anything else being built on the property that we've got to look at, sheds, humpies, whatever they build there, or they want a caravan. People, if they put horses in there, they move all junk and rubbish and everything there, and that's one of our main objections. Just to start with, up there, I believe you'd already know, it's a unique little area of Moorabool. There's approximately 10 farms there. I've been up there about 16 years. I've seen people come and go. We've all got the caveats, can't do this and can't do that. Everyone's been happy with it, abided by it to a certain extent, and everyone's been happy. Now, because previous speaker, for some reason only known to himself, wants to stay there and breed dogs, which is another issue which will escalate if he stays there and continues to do it. And we're going to have him with his dogs and people with horses, cattle. The people that have been grazing cattle there, it's overgrazed. Down in his back paddock, there's erosion going down to the creek, it's caving in. No care of the property. It needs someone in there that owns the whole property and looks after it. It's just, he's the first one if he gets subdivision. There's another gentleman down the road that will go for one as well. And that'll just crumble the whole unique area that we live in up there.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Borgell?
Yeah, I've got one. So far, all three objectors have said they're worried about excess infrastructure being built on the property if it was to be subdivided. But if it was to be sold as a whole, what's to stop the new owner doing the same thing? What would the difference be?
The new owner has...
Okay. Currently, Mr. Smith wants to cut out his house from the land.
Yes.
Yes. Not subdivide the property. So far, yeah, all three objectors have said they don't want extra infrastructure built in the surrounding paddocks that would be sold off. But if Mr. Smith was to sell everything as a whole, including the house,
yes,
what would stop the new builders, the new owners, starting up a horse stud or starting up a and putting in pigsties or whatever you want?
That's all very good as long as it's done appropriately. It's got to be passed by the council. They've got to apply for a permit to build them, and where they build them, in what position, and we have a say in that as well, I believe.
So what would be the difference between someone who owns the house doing that and someone who owns the land doing the same thing? Because it would be the same.
Someone that owns the land is, like Howard said when he was here, wants to whack up a little thing to keep their stuff for their horses, which is going to be some knock-up shed they drag in there, sit in the place, won't be passed by council for a permit, and that's what will happen. I've seen it happen before.
But okay.
Councillor Bingham.
Thank you, Mr. Just question to Mr. Bazoodenhurt, just clarification. So if there was any further application, so for instance, a piggery, a stud farm, horse stables, a shed, just point of clarification, all these applications would come to council and it would go out, would it go out for consultation or just come to council?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this is zoned farming land, so there's certain uses which is defined as Section 1 uses. So certain uses which directly related to farming activities will be permissible without a planning permit. Certain uses is classified as Section 2, they may need a planning permit. Certain structures will require building approval, certain structures may require a planning approval. So it depends on what a person wants to do. So first of all, they'll have to look at a planning scheme to see if it's a permissible use, if it's in support and directly related to farming, or whether it's a use which needs planning permission, and then the type of structure, whether they need only building approval or whether planning and building approval. Mr. Mayor, I don't know if Rob Phillish wants to add anything.
Ms. Phillish.
Through the Mayor, I'd agree with what Mr. Bazoodenhurt has said. The only other thing is there is a covenant on that property which stays on the property, which I think restricts piggeries and a couple of things, so nothing would change in relation to that. Just one other thing is council doesn't issue building permits, so building permits wouldn't go through a notification process. Planning permits may require that.
Subsequent to that.
Subsequent question.
Because I can only assume that the intent would be maybe adjustment or whatever. So stables, horse stables, a shed, would that require under this land? Would that require to come to council for a Phillish?
So through the chair, if it's a agricultural use, which is in the farming zone, as was explained, Section 1 use, and then it's likely not to require a permit for a horse stables, for example, or a shed that's being used for agricultural purposes, for storing machinery or.
Subsequent to that one, Mr. Mayor, apologies. So can we put another condition, if effectively just blanketing the land, that all activities need to come for approval to the relevant body, so such as obviously council?
Just point of order, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, certainly, Councillor Tatchell.
We're continually talking about an alternate motion that hasn't been tabled yet. So, and these questions are relevant to that. And I think we're on dangerous ground here. Because
I agree, Councillor. I agree, Councillor Tatchell. So just refrain your questions and
Mr. Mayor,
questions about if you were to propose something.
We're here to make decisions, and I'm trying to wrap my head around where I'm going with this. So this was just clarification, but that all said and done, that was my question. So
no worries, Councillor Bingham. Any other questions, councillors? No further questions. Thank you, sir. Councillors, I'm in your hands.
I'd like to move an alternative motion to approve a permit with conditions, and included in those conditions is that there can be no further subdivision of either lot and no new dwellings to be constructed on either lot.
Councillors, have you both got copies of that proposed alternate, or the proposed motion?
Yes.
Yes.
I have read it. I haven't got a copy of it.
Okay, no worries. So we have a mover. Do I have a seconder, councillors?
Well, I'll second with a question, well, depending on the question.
Certainly.
Or depending on the answer, sorry. So, back to my original question, is there a condition that we can put on this that requests that all buildings or whatever need be have to come to the relevant authority, being council? Can we do that?
So through the chair, we can't impose a condition which requires an assessment under the Planning and Environment Act for a permit if there's not a trigger in the actual Mirrabul planning scheme, which is the case. So the answer to your question is no.
Okay. Look, I'm going to second that anyway. I want to second
the councillor Bingham. Do we have any objections? Councillor Tatchell objects, so we have a debate. Councillor Dudzik.
This is an unusual situation. We have a couple that wish to remain on their land. They have unfortunate circumstances that they're dealing with. They're prepared to agree to a Section 173 agreement which prohibits further subdivision of either lot and prohibits any new dwellings. And that actually substantially reduces the value of their property. But in order to be able to stay in their own home, they're prepared to do that. Chances are that when the property owners pass away, whoever purchases the property will reconsolidate the lots. I think this is just about considering the unique circumstances and making allowances for it.
Councillor Tatchell.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. And look, I understand that and I sympathise with the position that Mr Smith's in. But ultimately, we're not in the what-if business, so we can only deal with the problem as it sits on the table today. This is not the first time we've come across this problem, and it won't be the last. The issue we have in this particular case is there's confusion between what Mr Smith wants to do with that land in terms of selling it off, and then the confusion about the actual farmland itself. And it being that the objectors are saying that they don't want anything built there, they don't want it to be used as farmland, they want it to be used for ecological reasons. Well, agricultural land is agricultural land, and the problem when you take away or subdivide a piece of agricultural land and then put conditions on it that make it impossible as a standalone property to build a shed or to build a hay shed if it was used for that, stables if it was used for that. If you start to put all of these conditions on it, all we're going to end up with is exactly what we've got now, a problem, because it will just become weeds. Now, we've got a major issue here. Mr Smith says, and I sympathise with his problem, that he is incapable of farming that 40 acres. And I understand that. But the objectors by the same notion, based on the argument that they put forward, they don't want to farm it either. So ultimately, we're going to end up with a problem either way. Now, whilst I accept that Mr Smith's reason is very sound, and we're going to see this in succession farming all over the Shire, where people are ageing, they want to stay in the place that they know, and this has an added problem where it has a debt that was not related to Mr Smith directly. It's a very complex item, but we are in the planning business, and that's what we have to deal with on the table. Whilst emotionally, it would be very easy to accept Mr Smith's argument, the plain reality is if we subdivide a 2 acre block in that particular area, it doesn't fit any of our planning schemes from one end to the other. And to add insult to injury, we also have the problem where we're saying you're not to build a stable, you're not to build a hay shed, you're not to build a machinery shed, and yet we have a standalone agricultural property that will basically sit there with a lessened value and an incapacity to be used for a said purpose. So whilst whilst the heart says we'd love to help Mr Smith, the reality is we deal in planning law. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
No worries. Would any other councillor like to speak Second, sorry, councillor Bingham, you are, councillor Bingham.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This alternative motion in no shape or form has a current condition on it that the new occupier can not build a shed or a stable. It's purely just, obviously I did ask that question. It's purely just no further residential developments or commercial developments. Stable, it still can be farmed. There is no difference between somebody else farming a section or Mr Smith farming his entire property. Either way, they're the same uses. I think, and a large part of the objections were in regards to, further subdivision. I believe that this 173 agreement does alleviate a lot of the issues that the objectors brought up, and I see this as a little bit of a middle ground.
Any other councillor to speak? Councillor Paul Gall.
Yeah, look, I've been toing and froing on this even up until, well, the speakers were speaking in terms of moving one way or another. Generally, as a rule of thumb, I am usually fall against voting on, falling against in favour of cutting out a bit of a house block from a block of land. But it was actually Mr Smith's Mr Smith's thing that swayed me against it currently, in that he will take a financial hit and he just wants to stay in his house. I understand that, and as Councillor Patrick said, if you're voting with your heart, you do it every day of the week. But if he is, if he's got severe medical issues that might be hand short, like, he'd be better off selling a lot, just because he'd be in a better financial position. So I have actually fallen against it currently.
Any other councillor like to speak for or against? Councillor Keogh?
Is it too late to ask a question, Mr Mayor?
No, Councillor Keogh, you can ask a question.
To the planners, on that that land that's zoned rural, is there some structures that don't need a planning permit so as, for example, a shed to house horses? What sort of structures can be built there without requiring a council permit, is what I'm asking, just on a clarification.
Would you like to answer that?
Yeah, through the chair, if it's a permitted use under section 1, such as agriculture, and there are storage sheds for storage of machinery in relation to that existing use, they would not require a planning approval for the use of the shed.
If I can just add, they will however require a building approval. And upon building approval, the building survey will normally look at a planning scheme and see if there's any triggers under the planning scheme that require planning approval. So any building surveyor will review the planning scheme, and if he's after view that it triggers planning approval, then they won't issue a planning permit unless, a building permit, unless the planning approval has been issued.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Councillor Keogh?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor.
I'll ask one more time. Anyone else want to speak for or against? No more speakers. I'll put the item to a vote. Those in favour? Those against? Can I just do that again, Councillor Keogh, because you were halfway between those in favour and those in favour? Those against? The motion is lost. And just to be clear, I used my casting vote to make that decision. Councillors?
Could I ask a question, Mr Mayor?
Certainly.
There was a lot of discussion from the objectors and the applicant in terms of this property in particular, and we have a problem on both ends. It's not being looked after at the present time. Would it be more sensible if we were to do a subdivision in that area? I think 2 acres is unacceptable, but in order to appease both parties, would it be better if it was a 20 acre? Because a 40 acre is not a farmland anyway, it's not a farming enterprise. But if it was split into two, is it possible that we would have an opportunity then to say that it could be protected for both ecological reasons and for farming. I'm asking the planning department if that's a possibility.
Through the chair, the reason this subdivision can be considered is it's an excision of the dwelling. And under our local policy, that recommends there's a 2 hectare maximum size for the dwelling, because the excision policy is really being put in place for succession planning. So that would make it more difficult from a planning point of view for officers to support.
Could I have a supplementary question there, if I may, Mr. Mayor?
Yep.
I know we haven't done the rural study yet on rural living, and I know this question is going to come up time and time again, that we obviously can't make people farm. When we actually do this study, if it came back that these smaller acreages would be extended in terms of how people could deal with them in terms of housing and rural properties where people want to run horses or whatever it might be, is it possible for this application to come back after that report is done to see if the goalposts are in exactly the same position?
I can answer that.
Mr. Bausenhout.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, that's possible. This application gets assessed against current planning scheme policy. So if there's a new planning scheme policy in place, then that means that application will be assessed against the new policy. So if the rural strategy is done and we incorporate certain aspects of that into the planning scheme, that will form part of a future application assessment criteria.
Okay, so councillors, we're going to move to the next item because there was no motion foreshadowed, so therefore there was no decision made. Can we bring back Councillor Sullivan, please?
Could I ask a question, Mr. Mayor?
You can always ask a question, councillor, at any stage of the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So it's not possible to go back to the original recommendation?
I've taken advice that we foreshadow our motion, so therefore we can't.
Oh, okay, thank you. So we have a nil result, basically.
Nil result, councillor.
Thank you.
So councillor Sullivan, just for your information, there was an alternate motion put forward to approve, yes, which failed, and there was no other motion put forward.
Okay. So it comes back again. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to, councillors, with your indulgence, I'm going to change the order here and move to item 7.3. We've got people standing out in the cold. Next item with the speaker. Councillors happy with that?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, moving to item 7.3. We have a speaker, Mr. Andrew Lewis. Just for your information, we are live streaming this meeting and it's being recorded and will be available on our webpage tomorrow.
Thank you. Make sure it's turned off, sorry. So thanks everyone very much for coming out on late night, and thanks very much for your service generally. My application is about, I live out at Pound Creek Road Navigators. I've been there for 16 years. When I bought the property, it was in 5 lots. I consolidated down to 2 lots, to enable myself to get a second building permit. I built the house there, and that now sits on 72 acres. So, can everyone go back and forward? Sorry, I'll do it both ways. So 30 odd acres, 30 odd hectares. The report before you tonight, I just sort of probably want to talk to a couple of points there that I think probably haven't been fully discussed and that sort of haven't really taken into account perhaps the nuances. Not a typical subdivision in a farming zone, but that's for you guys to determine, obviously. There is a 173 over the agreement over the land. The 173 agreement was entered into in 15 years ago in relation to that consolidation. So when I consolidated the 5 lots down to 2 lots, I was asked to enter into a 173 agreement, which I did. The 173 agreement, you guys have taken legal advice on it, or the officers have taken legal advice on it. I haven't seen the legal advice, so I don't know what it says. I have then gone off and grabbed my own legal advice. from Maddox and also David King from Geelong. Now, Maddox gave you guys advice on the 173 agreement in 2010. And Maddox have come back to me and said essentially that, yeah, you could argue it either way, whether it applies or not. It's not a straightforward case. The main reason why it's not straightforward now is that there's another allotment in the mix, and that is the allotment I've bought to the north of the subject property. So I'm now sitting on 2 lots, and I'm looking to re-subdivide that into 2 lots to create a 25 acre and a 52 acre. So they call it 10 hectare and 21 hectare allotment. That's the plan there. The report before you says that that it can't be varied and can't be allowed. Now, that's just not the case with Section 173s. They can be varied, they can be put aside, they can be, you know, whatever you like. It's an agreement between council, myself and the other original landowner, and I've spoken to them. They're very happy for it to be varied, no problem at all. So it can be varied, or it can be set aside, or, you know, as I say, either way, it's not your legal advice. As I say, I didn't see a copy of it, but I'd be very, very surprised if the lawyers have come out and said that can't happen. I'm sure they've said, yes, Section 173 applies in this application. That may be what they've said, but I think it's a huge leap to go from, yes, it applies, to it prohibits this application. I just, and all the advice I've got from the 2 lawyers I've spoken to said that just won't be the situation. Then we move on to the next point. So the 3 points being the Section 173, the new dwelling and the fragmentation of the neighbourhood. The new dwelling originally it was refused by Central Highlands Water. So I went to Central Highlands Water and I spoke to them about it. They've since now supported it, because what we're doing is we're going to fence out the creek. The creek's about 800 metres long along my property, fencing it out and reforestation it. So that'll keep the cows out of the creek, put the trees into the neighbourhood, give a net benefit, according to Central Highlands Water, to their catchment quality. So they're happy with that. So the Central Highlands Water have changed their mind. There's no mention of Central Highlands Water changing their minds in the report before you. There is a lot of discussion about Central Highlands refusing the application in the first instance, but never changing their mind. So there is a letter from Central Highlands Water, which you guys have got, but it's not attached to that report. So the thing is that Central Highlands Water are in support of this and they deem it to be a net benefit. I was also asked them to get a farm plan management, which I did do for Meridian, and they've come up with the same result due to the trees along the creek and that sort of thing. The slight negative of the house, and I get that that's a negative in a farming environment, is well and truly offset by the 800 metres of tree planting all the way along the creek. So, as I say, that's in the report, the farm management plan, and also as I say, but no net benefit is notified, is noted in the report to council. The report also makes no mention of council's own rural growth policy, which talks to the minimum of 8 hectares in my exact area. So you've highlighted there's a number of areas you've gone through. That report was done in 2012, and in that they note that whilst it is farm zoning, no one's farming there. You know, is the reality. It's a hobby farm area. The average lot adjoining my property is 10.06 hectares if it's got a house on it, and 9.4 hectares if it doesn't have a house on it. The average lot I'm aiming to create is 15 hectares. So it's one of 10 hectares and one of 21 hectares. So it is, the 2 lots will still be in excess of the 8 hectares that is outlined in your own growth policy. It's in excess of the average for the area. And so this idea of fragmentation is just not relevant. The idea of the Pound Creek Road Navigators is a rural, broad acre where everyone goes and farms and makes a living off the land. Yeah, that ship sailed a long, long time ago. This is a hobby farm area. Whilst it's rural, and I get it's rural, I'm not trying to fragment the area. It is fragmented. This re-subdivision would still have 2 larger lots than the average for the whole, I worked it out to about, I counted up about 50 lots. But the ones adjoining me, which I knew who owned and where they sat, are an average of either 10.06 or 9.4 hectares. The property has been advertised twice because of the Central Highlands originally saying no to it, and so then it got re-advertised with the Central Highlands Water support. And in both advertising, none of my neighbours have complained. No one's objected. I've hand-delivered plans of what I propose to all my near neighbours. I've hung them off the fence, 10 were taken, 8 out of the 10 were taken. And in all those instances, no one's made any objection at all. In fact, a lot of them were sort of excited to see that I might be able to stay in the area. I wouldn't have been able to stay in this house if I wasn't able to buy this extra allotment that adjoins my property. So I would have just had to sell it because it's too big a land, too big a house. It's on sort of multiple levels and all that sort of thing. So it just wouldn't have happened. This would create an opportunity for me to build a house that I could retire into. The goal then being that my nephew would take over the main house and the main dwelling, the main farm, and he continue to farm it. That's the opportunity I'm looking to create here. And as I say, I just think the report is a little bit black and white, and it isn't a black and white situation. As I say, with the creek running through it and the environmental benefit that we can create by fencing out the creek and creating the trees all the way along there. And as I say, that's Central Highlands happy with that. The Meridian Farm Plan also details that too. So there's a lot of sort of points in my application that I don't think are well represented in the report before you.
Yeah. Councillors, any questions?
Just one.
Councillor Sullivan.
Mr Lewis, you indicated that you've had some legal advice that would seem to be contrary to what is in, well, we haven't actually got the legal advice, but what's been purported in the report. So the legal advice that you received, it sort of suggests that it is not black and white. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the existence of the 173 does not prohibit this as a planning application. That's what all the legal advice says that. And then whether or not the current application actually is contravening the section 173 as a separate discussion is also not clear, because you've introduced another allotment into the mix. Okay. The original 173 contemplated the 2 lots. Now we've got a 3rd lot, as I say. So it averages out to 3 lots over the whole thing. But yeah, the point being that the 173 didn't contemplate that is a legal argument. I'm happy to say, look, there's legal arguments both sides. There's no problem with that. But I haven't seen your legal advice, and I haven't seen the question asked of your legal advisors. What is it? Does this apply? Well, that's fine. If they said yes, it applies. That still doesn't mean yes, it applies and therefore prohibits. And that's my point. It doesn't prohibit. No legal advice will say that about section 173.
Councillor Dudley.
I have a question through the Mayor of Officers. Have they been provided with copies of this legal advice that the applicant is quoting?
Mr Mayor, we wouldn't, as standard practice, provide legal advice copy of the legal advice to the applicant.
No.
Councillor Dudley's referring to the applicant's legal advice.
That's right. I haven't seen it.
Through the chair, we have the original legal advice, which was on the original one, but not the recent legal advice, I guess, which was saying something different to the legal advice we had been provided for this particular application.
And further to that, has what the applicant is saying been taken into account in assessing this application?
Through the chair, what the application has been assessed against all the information that's been provided. So it would have looked at all the material that was provided to it, and then the officer has made a recommendation based on all of that information.
Councillor Bingham.
Mr Mayor, I'd actually look to actually moving an alternative to actually deferring this, because if the current recommendation went through, I think that the applicant might say it wasn't a fair process. So I would actually move to defer, so the 2 parties can.
Okay, Councillor, can you put that down in writing so that we can give that to you on what you're recommending?
Yep.
And I'll be happy to second it.
Just a couple of questions.
Certainly, Councillor.
I'm not.
Any more questions at this point?
No, not.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks again for everyone's time.
Thank you.
Councillor Sullivan.
Just a question. I know that the legal advice and the 173 agreement are referred to in the report, neither of which we've cited. They're not attached here in any shape or form. I think it would be useful to peruse that information to know whether, in fact, not doubting what's there, but just for our own edification. I think that would be useful. I guess the other question I have, and I think Mr Lewis made a point about the lot sizes in and around that area, and I do know that area reasonably well, and what he's saying is correct. In the assessment of the officers, and maybe it's something to take on notice, what is the measure that is used to assess the farming operation of this proposal? And what I'm coming back to, do you look at the productivity or the viability? What is the measure that is actually assessed to determine whether this proposal or any proposal has merit or not, no merit? And if I could get perhaps I need an answer to that before I move on to my second part, with your indulgence, Mr. Mayor.
Certainly.
Through the chair, I think what has to be understood in this particular application is that it's for 2 dwellings.
Yes.
Essentially, because there's a farm management plan.
Yes.
It really needs to demonstrate that the second dwelling is required, but also really needs to demonstrate that the first dwelling is required for agricultural purposes as well when you're splitting the land down into smaller parcels. So that is what the officers would have looked at, is what type of agricultural activity is reasonably requires a dwelling to be on the site to justify the second dwelling.
But what I'm saying is, you either talk about productivity or viability, because the two things are quite distinctive in agricultural production.
It's not about the productivity of the viability of the site. It's about whether a dwelling is reasonably required for that agricultural activity to occur.
Just a supplementary question. I note that the applicant provided a farm management plan. I was somewhat disappointed in the discussion, which seemed to, some of it was opinion rather than fact. I was disappointed in that personally. There was sections there that were putting an opinion rather than fact, and I think a report, in fairness, should actually talk about fact rather than opinion. I think that's something. But I guess the farm management plan, and that was sort of dismissed. Now, I suppose the question is, what expertise does somebody in this organisation have to assess the wherewithal of a farm management plan, whether it is a good one, whether it's something that can be done going forward or not?
Question, Mr. Bowsenhout.
Yeah, if I, with your permission, just go back to the first question. Just to reiterate, a dwelling and farming zone is not a primary use, it's a secondary use. So you need to demonstrate that for that house or that dwelling is needed to sustain the farming activities. So what's happening in this instance, he's got an existing dwelling and he's got a cattle farming operation. So what he says, he's going to subdivide the land, he's going to do the same farming, but he now needs 2 dwellings on it. So my understanding is that he subdivide, he doesn't really significantly intensify the farming activities, but he says he still needs that second dwelling to sustain the farming activities. But we have got an option if the farming plan is not questioned, we can always refer it to an external expert for peer review.
And in this case, was that done?
Well, no, in this case it wasn't done. I can just get clarification, but
that's great.
Any other questions, councillors?
Well, I guess not wishing to delay the decision moved by Councillor Bingham and seconded by Councillor Dudzik, but I do think it gets to a fundamental core that what we have here, and this typifies, that's why the document, the rural strategy, whatever it is that council had, it was to take into consideration of the fact that these areas, there's a mismatch between what's happening on the ground and what the planning scheme says, and that's why that document came into being, to try and sort of address that situation, to say, well, look, this is not traditional broadacre farming anymore. That horse well and truly bolted 40 years ago. So we have to recognise what's on site and manage that. We're trying to actually manage, as the old saying, looking forward, going in the rear vision mirror. That's what we're doing.
Councillor Thatcher's got a question.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. My question is about during the discussion from the applicant, he mentioned a document that was tabled in 2012. My question is, was the document in 2012 referenced within this report to come to this conclusion?
Phyllis,
it's referred to.
Through to the chair, I would have to read the document to see if that was the case. I will take one point in relation to that document. I don't believe that document refers to subdivision. It refers to dwellings on lots that are already created, as opposed to newly created lots.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. For that clarifies that for me, yes.
Hey, Councillor Bourgell.
Yeah, my question is the applicant's asking to put an extra house with an additional subdivision. Would it change the rules, so to speak, if he was just to put an additional dwelling? I know you mentioned before, for land zone rural or land zone farming, got to show justification to have an extra dwelling. But isn't there also like an opportunity for, say, a manager's cottage or an overseas cottage or something like that on the land? My question is, would this be a similar application if there wasn't the subdivision along with the second dwelling on the land? If that makes sense.
Through the chair, this comes to the point that we spoke about before of the farm management plan showing a justification for a dwelling. There's a higher bar to actually show a justification that the farm management plan requires 2 dwellings.
Okay.
So that would be more difficult. I think also my recollection is the 173 agreement also has some commentary in relation to whether another dwelling can go on the site as well. So it's not just the subdivision in that instance.
Any further questions, councillors?
Well, I suppose it's, if the proposed deferment gets up, and I'm just, could councillors actually be supplied a copy of this advice and also the agreement? Because, I mean, it's been talked about, but we don't have it here. And there seems to have been contested by the applicant. So I think we need to actually see it. So I'm just putting it there, if the, predicating if the motion gets up.
Understood. So, Councillor Tatchell?
Just a quick one, Mr. Mayor. Based on what Mr. Phillips said, so relative to what Mr. Phillips said, if the applicant was to put a proposal in for 1 dwelling and have that completed, he then has the option to put in a proposal for a second dwelling on the subdivision devoid of the 173 agreement. Is that correct?
I'm not clear on the question.
Well, you said that the complication within the farm plan on this particular application was that it was a request for 2 dwellings. So my question is, if the applicant put in another application for 1 dwelling and satisfied that need, he would then have the option, devoid of the 173 agreement, to put in an application for the second dwelling on its own merits. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
That's correct, Councillor. We have I'll just read out what we've got in writing. So it's to defer the decision to allow for further discussion between both parties.
And to have further documents from the applicants circulated to all councillors.
And I second that.
Yes.
Well, I'm assuming, as I preempted, if it gets forward, we're going to receive the reports, the 173 agreement and the legal advice that's referred to in this report, so we can peruse it ourselves.
So I've had in writing, I can be as specific.
Oh, no, I suppose is that undertaking being given to us? That's all.
Yep, that's needed to take an informed decision provided.
Yeah, so Councillor Bingham, is it just the original decision that officers will provide that information?
I'll also make a quick correction. He said that Central Highlands Water provided the application in the report. So on page, I think it's 46, it does state that Central Highlands Water consent with conditions.
Okay. Thank you.
Just a correction.
So just to be very clear, the motion is to defer to allow for further discussion between both parties.
And for the...
You want the second bit in there as well? Further
documents circulated to all councillors.
Supplied by applicant to be circulated to all councillors.
Yep.
That's the motion that we have before us. We have a mover, we have a seconder. Are there any objections?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
We have an objection, so we have a debate. I'll ask the mover to speak.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I always try and be as fair as possible, and when you start getting confusion thrown around, the whole fair process just doesn't come into play. If the current recommendation was voted on and ultimately passed, the applicant himself wouldn't deem that as fair. There's a lot of difference between rejecting something with taking in consideration all the documents and rejecting something taking in consideration half the documents. So that's why I'm deferring, for an opportunity to get all the documents on the table and make a thorough decision.
Councillor Tatchell.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. A couple of issues here. One is that generally with a deferral, it comes back exactly the same way it was. But my real concern here is that our role is to deal with what's on the table, not hypotheticals, not introduction of information that's not tabled. Our role tonight is purely about the officer's report as it sits tonight. And the officer's report is very clear. And so from the perspective of deferring it to introduce more argument, I've established that by asking the officer that if this wasn't to be approved, as it shouldn't be, that the applicant would have the opportunity, with all of that information, to come back to council for the request for the second dwelling. So from the perspective of what we do as a development assessment committee, our role is to read the report that's been well written by the officer. It's our decision then to either accept the recommendation based on what's in front of us, not on the hypotheticals, not on the maybes, not on reports that could turn up or not turn up, not if it goes to VCAT, purely based on the information. And as the officer said, and I take him at his word, that he was given all of the information at the time to come to that conclusion. To bring in subsequent information and then make a decision on it on the run, in my view, would be poor governance.
But just for council's information, just if there is someone who's proposing something alternate, I'd ask that they foreshadow it. Otherwise, whatever motion gets up will be.
Could I foreshadow, Mr Mayor, the original recommendation as a motion?
You can foreshadow that, Councillor Tatchell. Councillor Dudzik.
In my opinion, it's worth considering the deferral because there were some questions asked by the applicant. There were some discrepancies, which I think, in all fairness, we should have the opportunity to verify if they're correct or not. It just didn't seem to line up. And if we're going to make an informed decision, we need to make sure that we have access to all the information available, and based on the things the applicant said, I don't think we actually have it at this time. We need more information to make the correct decision in this matter.
Any other councillor like to speak for or against?
I would speak for.
Councillor Sullivan.
I think there has been clearly the applicant raised the matter, the applicant raised the matter of the contestability of the 173 agreement, of which no one here, no councillor has actually seen and had the opportunity to peruse. Neither have we seen the legal opinion that council has received. So I think it's a matter of informing ourselves, not bringing any more information into the debate, but informing ourselves as well. And I think our role is to actually scrutinise what's before us. That's our role. We do not have to take anything as verbatim. I think we have a role and responsibility to scrutinise, to assure ourselves that the decision that we made is one that we can live with and comfortable with. So I think we have to do that. And this is not this is only a deferment. This is not sort of one way or the other. And I would prefer a late decision, Mr Mayor, than a bad decision. Thank you.
Any other councillor like to speak for or against? So I'll put the motion
Do you want me to?
Oh, sorry, councillor Bingham, would you like to close the debate?
Mr. Mayor, but make no mistake, a deferment isn't a decision either way. Whilst the recommendation will stay exactly the same, if further documents, substantiate changing the recommendation, then I'm sure an alternative recommendation will be circulated to all councillors if that's so what council deems. I think as a councillor as part of the council, we're here to make informed decisions. We're not here just to make a decision just for the sake of it. And as Councillor Sullivan so rightly said, I'd much prefer a late decision than the wrong one.
Thank you, councillor. So I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Item is carried. Item is carried. Motion is carried. All right, councillors, with your indulgence, we're going to move into item 7.8. Yep. You have a speaker to item 7.8. Which is Miss Karen Bruno. Good evening, ma'am. Just like to inform you that this is being live streamed and being recorded and will be on the council webpage.
I have a hearing loss, so I can't hear you what you're saying. I know you're speaking. Yeah.
Two cards.
It's being streamed.
Okay.
And other people can see or hear everything you say.
Good. Okay. Thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to my planning application to open a cafe in Blackwood and offer the following information in support of the application. 15 Martin Street has been a licensed restaurant and bar for many years and is in the middle of Blackwood Township, opposite the Blackwood Hotel and beside a licensed premises that operates a cafe on weekdays only. Since September 2019, there has been no cafe open on weekends in the centre of town, which has been very detrimental to the town itself, to the survival of small business and also future tourism for Blackwood. I have submitted a petition in support of my application. It contains 280 signatures and demonstrates that there's a lot of support for this application to be approved. I acknowledge that the planning officer has recommended the granting of this application, subject to a number of conditions, and it is one of those conditions that I'm concerned about and would like to address now. Point 7, under the environmental health section, one condition is that I install an on-site wastewater management system. The history of my premises and the reports that I've submitted to council for the application indicate that the existing on-site wastewater treatment system is adequate for the proposed cafe, and the facts relating to this are, so we've got a difference of opinion. When the council septic audit was conducted, my premises was operating as a licensed restaurant and the septic was found to be adequate for its use and didn't require an upgrade under the council program. The existing wastewater treatment system was upgraded by the previous owner approximately 15 years ago, and the current lines that are there now were installed and they disperse the effluent. 2 independent assessments of the existing septic system have been conducted by a suitably qualified professional in order to determine its suitability for the proposed cafe. So that's something that I arranged to have done. And before this assessment of the septic, the tank was emptied, cleaned out, inspected, photographed and found to be in good working order with no cracks or chips. The disbursement line pits were opened and inspected and photographed and found to be in good working order. Soil samples were also taken and photographed, and it was found an average of 60 centimetres of topsoil was present, which is very unusual for Blackwood. And that indicates excellent drainage and absorption, so that all the absorption gets, is contained within my land. This assessment found that the existing all-waste septic tank and the land application area, so that's where the lines are, was compliant with the current EPA Code of Practice guidelines for current use and was more than adequate for what I was proposing in the cafe. Table 4 of the EPA Code of Practice indicates that tea rooms and cafes are deemed to produce 10 litres per day per seat. I'm proposing a cafe of 35 seats, and so the wastewater output is 350 litres a day, so that's according to the table, the government table. The capacity of my land application area is 1,200 litres per day, so that's more than enough to cope with the future waste from any proposed cafe. Hence my, I guess, concern about and confusion as to why. And the last point I wanted to make was that at no point has the council officer been out and inspected my system in relation to this application. I'm the only one that's organised an inspection. I've had a report done. He's used the government guidelines and the EPA guidelines and said that it's adequate. And as a note, I wanted to say I'm only proposing to serve light food, such as sandwiches and pastries and cakes, breakfast and lunch. Most of the cakes and things will be cooked on site. It's not like I'm proposing for a licensed premises where I'm cooking curries and big meals and pizzas and certainly that's what's happened in the past. And so, yeah, given all of I've mentioned there, the reasoning behind the recommendation that I install a new septic tank to run just a cafe 2 days a week is not at all clear to me. And so I'm asking, yeah.
Councillor Bingham, question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So in light of the questions to Mr Bazudin, so in light of the applicant speaking, so and obviously she's referring to item number 7 under environmental health and the condition being the current on-site wastewater treatment system must be upgraded to an on-site wastewater management system with the capacity to treat effluent to a minimum of 20, 30, 10 BOD, suspended solids and chlorination. I'll be completely honest, I have no idea what that is actually meaning, except it needs to be upgraded. So in light of what the applicant is saying, is it actually reasonable that we need to upgrade that wastewater management system? And also, how much does that cost?
What's the point of order, Councillor Thatcher?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, it's been mentioned twice now. I'd make the point that the Blackwood area for sewage is probably one of the most studied areas in the Mirrabul Shire in terms of the sewage problems, and that whilst it's been mentioned that the officer didn't go up there, there would have been no need for the officer to go up there because every property has been studied and evaluated.
Yeah, that's okay, Councillor Thatcher, but the question is a valid question.
Yeah, look, and I don't think the councillor was listening to the response. It has been assessed.
Point of order, Mr Mayor.
Someone else.
I don't think it's up to the council to tell another councillor they're listening or not listening. What I'm trying to clarify.
Question, Councillor.
Yeah, okay, so my question being, in light of what the applicant is saying in regards to a wastewater management system already being assessed by other bodies thoroughly, is this a reasonable condition? And also, and I'll have another follow-up on that one, is taking into account this is a little cafe on the weekends. I'm not too sure what the cost is, but would the cost make
Point of order, Mr Mayor, it's debate.
This question, would the cost outweigh the viability?
Allow the question, Councillor. Yeah. So the question is very clear. Is what is the purpose of requiring a change of septic, and do we consider cost?
I can maybe go and then ask Rob to add. Mr. Felix. So first of all, this was also referred to Western Water. So Western Water is a referral authority. It's what we call a section 55. So Western Water came back with a similar condition. If you look at condition 19, require also the upgrade to the same standard. In this particular instance, council don't have the discretion to overrule a section 555 referral authority. So if they would have objected, then we would have had to refuse it. In this instance, they agreed to support application subject to conditions. And this condition is very similar to the one that was imposed by our environmental health, specific condition 7, I think. So it's my understanding that they have assessed it and there was additional information that was provided to them. They did take that into consideration and they still came back and they required this condition, which relates to the upgrade of the system.
Apologies, I did not see that condition, and I know we can't disagree from other authorities.
Councillor Vorgel.
So just to clarify, so Western Water did receive the additional septic reports?
That is my understanding. I think the applicant has also been in direct conversation with Western Water.
So, yeah. So have you sent your updated reports to Western Water?
Yes, I have. And I'm going to appeal that with them. Again, I have the same question. They're using the EPA guidelines, which is what we're all bound by in terms of this decision. I have no idea why it is that they're not allowing it. The same reason. It's one thing to say that Blackwood's well researched and a real concern in terms of the wastewater. It's another thing to inspect my property, which is unusual to anywhere in Blackwood in terms of the depth of topsoil to start with. And the fact that my place has been a cafe and restaurant for years, nearly 30, 40 years, it's a huge history. So I don't understand why now this tiny little cafe is going to require such a massive overturn, especially when the audit proved that it wasn't required for a restaurant at that time.
Councillor Sullivan had a question, then you to Councillor Bingham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do note the commonality of some of the conditions from the EHO to Western Water, which begs the question, those which are the same should be aligned the same, otherwise you get some slight differences. But would it be fair that if the applicant could get the output tested currently, and if it met 20, 30, 10, would that satisfy? I mean, there seems to be this propensity where a new system must be installed. Now, we've heard from the applicant that is of the view that it's functioning now. So I guess the question is, and I don't know what anyone's canvasses with Western Water or the EHO, if the current system was tested and it complied with that standard, would that suffice?
Through the chair, the system that's in there was put in a number of years ago, which was compliant at the time. Okay, so there have been changes in the compliance for new systems. A 20-30-10 system is normally a biocycle, so it's not a normal standard septic, which treats the water through an aeration system within the tank. So the current system, my understanding, is just the normal system, which just does it as an anaerobic type reduction of the waste, I suppose, which then goes to the effluent lines, where we're a biocycle or a 20-30-10 as the addition of the aeration of it. So it decomposes that product a lot quicker. And the 10 is in relation to then it's also chlorinated before that wastewater is disposed into the effluent line. So to answer your question, I don't believe you could just upgrade it. You would have to change the system to do that.
Okay. Just supplementary. At the very least, could we actually have commonality between the EHO and the Western Water one, where they actually refer to the effluent disposal? I do know that some of the EHO's requirements relate to the food premises itself, which are distinct from Western Water, but I think sometimes you get subtle subtle changes which make it almost ambiguous between one authority and another, that's all.
Yes, Bingham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to move a motion to actually defer this item in order to give the applicant a chance to discuss that condition to upgrade that water treatment.
So move, councillor Bingham. Councillor Keogh had a question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my question to the applicant is, was it a reputable consultant who did your land assessment capability?
I believe so.
Please don't give a name.
Working in the industry for a while and used
Don't name anyone.
used to work for council.
Please don't.
Yeah, so I've got a full report here, which you, I understand, weren't given a copy of, but it's got all the photographs, it's got the EPA guidelines, everything referenced in there, which I'm welcome to leave.
Councillor Sullivan had another question.
Just another question, just with regards to the hours of operation. I mean, I guess like all things, is that adequate now and going forward? Condition 2 on the proposed permit talks about hours of operation 9 a.m. and
To 4 p.m.
So you've got and. I think it should be 2 at least, shouldn't it?
2 hours a day.
2 a day.
2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at breakfast and lunch trade and afternoon tea. So no main meal of any.
Okay.
Through the chair, I'll just clarify, it says operations are between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m.
Oh, I beg your pardon, just being a bit pedantic.
I'm happy to second councillor Bingham's motion.
So we have a mover and a second. Do we have, so councillor, do you want to write that down as soon as it's a alternate?
Right.
And I'll read it out to all councillors. I have a question if I may. So is it correct that because there's a Western Water condition, we could not approve that without that condition in there?
Yes, we have to approve it subject to their requirements.
What about the grandfather clause and allowing a septic that's been used for any thing like a septic being used for all this time to continue if it's in good working order?
So do we have existing user rights laws for those things?
So just in terms of the use itself, if a use is discontinued for more than 2 years, then existing use rights lapses. So the previous cafe was used and then it was discontinued for more than 2 years. So we can't, legally speaking, we can't apply existing use rights, fortunately.
Negotiate. I'll just say negotiate.
Councillor Keogh.
Mr. Mayor, an old septic tank that's an anaerobic type one that was all the ones that were condemned at Blackwood, they will never ever be able to give, I would suggest, an effluent with a 2030 10.
Is there a question there, councillor, or is there a debate?
It was a statement.
Mine wasn't condemned, mine was thought to be working adequately.
So councillor, I would ask that if you have questions, that's fine, otherwise we leave debate to the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So we have a motion here from councillor Bingham to defer to allow the applicant a chance to further negotiate with Western Water in regard to condition 19, is it?
The removal of 19. I'll add the word removal.
Oh, you can't
remove it. Yeah, removal of condition 19. So we're very clear, councillors, what's been put before us? So we have a mover.
It's already been moved and seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Has it?
Yeah.
This one?
Yeah.
Second, I think.
I think councillor Dudzik seconded.
I second it.
You second it. No worries. Thank you. Thanks. You object?
I'll object.
No worries. So we have debate. Councillor Bingham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This decision is based on the viability of the prospect of upgrading a wastewater sewer system, to even take one out of the ground is a substantiated cost. One which should be incurred if it genuinely needs to be upgraded. But if the applicant believes, because it's been assessed that she doesn't need to upgrade, well, let's give her a chance to further negotiate with Western Water. And if Western Water takes that condition off, let's take the condition off and let's approve it. But if Western Water is still adamant that this condition still remains, well, the condition remains and we'll approve it with the condition. But let's allow the applicant the opportunity to negotiate with Western Water.
Councillor Tatchell.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, nobody's arguing that if Western Water change their mind, that the water treatment plan can be changed. But the reality is, we've heard tonight from the general manager and given a very clear indication of the rules that we have to abide by. The fact that the existing use is over 2 years old, and to put that into perspective, Mr Mayor, look, if we didn't have a time limit on existing uses, we'd be still using a long drop in some of these places. So, in reality, we have a responsibility to act on behalf of Western Waters, or at least acknowledge Western Water, and the officers have done everything in their power to work within those rules. By deferring it, all we're basically doing is coming back with the same thing. There's absolutely no doubt that this is an approval, and if there's an issue with the septic tank and the water treatment plant, that could be resolved. And to bring it back to a DAC seems fruitless. I think that I think we need to acknowledge that our planning department has worked well within the rules, presented a report that the councillors have had 2 weeks to deal with, and probably this isn't the place to be making these questions or making policy on the run when we simply have an approval in front of us that has a condition that is for the well-being of the Blackwood community.
Councillor Dudzik.
A recommendation has been put forward for a deferral, and I think it is a reasonable thing. The applicant has presented evidence that she believes her septic tank is adequate, and I would like her to be able to get a response from Western Water as to whether or not they accept the opinion that she has provided. Septic tanks, they're very expensive. The use proposed on this land is very small. In fact, she's not going to make a lot of money with the limited hours that she has proposed the use. So I think it's fair enough to let her query if there is any movement in that requirement, and then for us to just come back to the next DAC and make a decision.
Any other councillor like to speak for or against? Councillor Sullivan, then Councillor Borgell.
I'll defer to my colleague first.
Councillor Borgell. It was a race.
So, I'd also like to speak for the amendment. With the section 55 referral body rules in place, our hands are effectively tied based on what Western Water say. So it makes no difference whether we agree with, with what we want. So I think it's more than reasonable to give Ms Bruno, the applicant, time to address Western Water to argue a case with them.
Councillor Sullivan.
Mr Mayor, contrary to the last time, I would actually argue against the amendment. And councillors, my rationale is this: unlike the previous one where it was a decision to refuse an application, this is what we're discussing here is a condition on the permit, which Ms Bruno has raised. I think if this motion were to proceed as is, then there's scope to Ms Bruno, if successful negotiation with Western Water, if it was successful, then to seek an amendment to the permit to have that particular condition changed or altered to suit. So in that particular case, there is scope, because that way, if successful, well, at least you can make an application to amend the permit. If unsuccessful, at least you're further down the track in your development rather than having to come back to some future DAC.
Are you foreshadowing?
Foreshadow in the event that this
Councillor Sullivan.
doesn't, I would move the motion as on the business paper.
Any other councillor want to speak for and against? Councillor Bingham, would you like to close the debate?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I totally hear where Councillor Sullivan is coming from, but I would tend not to go down that path because it makes it quite messy as a new application. Also, where that's going is, you know, the applicant, you know, she could go and start construction and you know, start refurbishing and whatnot. But we don't know if she can't remove the condition, she might just say, no, it's not viable. It's not worth it. I think, yeah, it's a matter of fair process. Let's give her the opportunity. It's not fair to say councillors have X amount of weeks because this is new information. Nobody knew about this. The council, I'm sure the council officers didn't know that the applicant was about to come in here and argue that her treatment plant is acceptable. This is new information and we're here to make informed decisions. Let's defer this. Let's sort out this new information. Let's come back. Let's make an informed decision.
Yeah. All right, councillors, I'll put the motion. Those in favour to defer? Motion is carried.
Yeah. Sort of nominate a time, or are we just going to wait for a response?
Yeah, that's a good question. Officers?
Through the chair, it would be a question that I would have asked if had an opportunity, what's reasonable time to provide the applicant to speak to Western Water, because there had been some discussions.
So the motion's already done, so we can change that. So
I understand that, but are we taking the next DAC or are we taking 2 months down the track? A commitment from the applicant and potential timeframe.
So I suppose you can discuss that with the applicant. So the item's been deferred to allow you an opportunity to go back to Western Water to see if they'll remove that requirement. Okay, councillors, just with your indulgence, I'd like to unblock items number 7.2, 7.4, 7.5, 7.6 and 7.7 so that we hear all the items together. Councillors agree to that?
Yes.
Okay. So councillors, I'm in your hands. Any questions?
I'll move the recommendation, Mr Mayor.
And I'll second.
So you're moving the recommendations for items 7.2, 7.4, 7.5, 7.6 and 7.7.
Just a question.
Yep, certainly. And seconded, councillor Dudzik.
Just have a
question, councillor Sullivan.
I guess this is something that's been perplexing since the delay of the land strategic directions document, which had a very long incubation period, I'd say probably 5 years from the time it started. And I'd just like some advice. Is anyone aware of any other piece of legislation where decisions are made, not here tonight because the document, the land strategic directions document and the neighbourhood residential loan have been implemented, but is anyone aware of legislation whereby a pending piece of legislation is used to assess a decision in any other statute? Because I can't think of one.
Mr Mayor, the best way I can answer it, we would normally refer to case law, go back to VCAT to see if there's examples which is parallel to this. In this particular instance, when these applications were submitted, I think in late last year, C81 was already a seriously entertained document. It's gone through the panel process, it's gone through council with recommendation to adopt it. So the applicant submitted these applications based on the fact that it has gone through a process and it's with the Minister's office to be gazetted. So the only thing we can rely on is case law. And when this was gazetted, it was done prior to the decision of being at council. There's no transition provision or exclusions or exemptions. It says that this comes in effect from this day, and any decision from this day needs to be aligned with this new amendment.
Mr. Mayor, that's fine, because that March 6th has come and gone, and that means that is the planning scheme. So what's been put forward is prohibited. But the fact is there's no other piece of legislation that I'm aware of in any jurisdiction whereby someone can be held account and have a decision made on a pending piece of legislation. And I think it's a wrong way to proceed things or process things. And I just think that this is a bad idea when applications, because it's not, you're saying, oh, it's seriously entertained document. Well, that's well and good, but it's not the law of the land at that time. Now it is here, and that's fine, I accept that. But the fact that someone put it in March, if this had come up to us, say, put in December, come in before the deadline, it still would have been the same point, but it would have been based on a pending piece of documentation.
Understood, Councillor Sullivan. Right, so we have a mover and a seconder. Do we have any objections? Those in favour? Those against?
Not against, I'm ambivalent.
Abstain, those who abstain? Nine councillors, we have.
Oh, abstain.
Abstain, Councillor Sullivan. So the motion is carried. Okay, we'll move into updates of trends and issues and other matters. Anything to report, Mr. Bersenhout?
Mr. Mayor, at this point in time, we've got no further updates.
Okay. Update on VCAT decisions?
No further updates on VCAT either.
Any other business? So the next meeting will be?
About a month's time.
Whenever. Not on there. So the next meeting is the second week of next month. Third week. Third week of next month. 17th of June. 17th of June will be the next meeting. Meeting is closed. Thank you, councillors. Thank you. Well, Lisa.